You're listening to the Valley Current.
How are you?
Hey, Tom, you look great.
Thank you. I had an espresso here going. It's
That's
a
that.
a little later here on the East Coast. So how you
Well,
been?
I pretty good. I appreciate your indulgence. We had all these new Zoom security issues where you have to jump through a million hoops, and then they ask you to reboot everything and restart everything. So you can't necessarily know up front whether the train's going to leave the station on time or not anymore.
We're having the same problem. What happens is in order to have a Zoom meeting right now, in addition to jumping through hoops, you have to buy various classes of Zoom. I
Right.
mean, it was a gift from God during COVID, but now it's becoming purgatory on earth. That's basically what our social media people say.
Yeah.
But
I read your thing and I sent you something that I thought
mhm.
should be circulated to everyone. And I'm saying to myself, it feels like we're in a crazy world right now. And it's getting crazier and crazier like every day of the week.
Right.
And more, I'm thinking there are going to be more and more Americans that come up with a need or expectation of having a plan B and having a place like you have in Peru and a place like I have in Mexico, where
Right.
if everything just goes sideways, I guess you just exit stage left.
Well, I think that I'm not quite there in terms of pessimism because there's too many signs. To me, there's three signs that one is locally within the discussion partners. Okay, you're looking at a community of about 200 people.
Hmm.
Over 60% are veterans, but a good portion of these 200 people voted for Trump.
Right.
Okay,
Well, they're
now
probably still supporting him too, right? Generally,
no,
no,
no, that's
no
that's that's
changing.
what's giving me hope is they're not apologizing for voting for the guy, but they are saying on a overwhelming sentiment here, uh, this isn't what I voted for.
Right.
Okay. The second thing is you see 8 million people show up for the No Kings.
Hmm.
And third is you're starting to see the Supreme Court and the appellate courts, et cetera, enforcing the rule of law.
Hmm.
Okay. Or being somewhat dismissive of things that are just absurd, like birthright citizenship.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So when I look at, my local community of colleagues, one second is just turn on the news and see 8 million people in the streets, myself included.
Hmm.
And the fact that the checks and balances that I were worried were starting to just be fiction are starting
Hmm.
to reassert themselves, at least within the court system. Okay, I think that I'm a little bit more optimistic. What makes me even more optimistic, Jack, is the op-ed that I shared with you last night.
Hmm.
Is even though um, I'm working with a number, more than a few people who are conservative, not right wing. I would say that our partnership is much more moderates, Democrats, and Republicans. There's extremes on both sides of those as well, obviously, just like there is everywhere.
Hmm.
But the desire to use our research to make a point, okay, is has become a universal in terms of how we are interacting with our clients and in our communities as well.
Hmm.
And essentially, the uh, target, if you will, for us is the Department of Defense. Part of it is because so many
Well,
of us,
it's called the Department of War now.
yeah, that's something that you'll never hear past my lips. We're not living in the 40s. If you want to be a Department of War, just jump into time machine and go backwards.
Well,
Uh,
we didn't start World War II, but it looks like we started World War III here.
well, let's you know, there's three ways to define war.
Hmm.
Okay, one is actual battles. Second is just a disintegration of relationships. okay, where you've agreed to disagree. You can no
Hmm.
longer be each other's backup.
Right.
And the third, which is insidious, and right now is the one that I would think is most appropriate, is basically abandonment.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's the one that I think is, if we go the a generous interpretation of war, we have essentially abandoned our allies, okay,
Hmm.
with whom we have formal relationships with, okay, and we are putting them at risk militarily, and we are putting them at risk economically.
Right.
So
Right.
we may not be firing any weapons at Poland. We barely avoided having to do it with Denmark over Greenland.
Right. Right.
But nobody's counting on us now, and that's the part that um, um, Angela Merkel warned in 2018 is that Europe could no longer count on the United States.
Right. And Starmer and others, including the guy in Canada, what's his name, gave a very
Uh,
eloquent
yeah,
speech.
yeah, at Davos,
Yeah, I
yes.
mean, they're calling a spade, and
Hmm.
they're saying effectively, um, don't count on the U.S. in any respect. Period. Full stop. And it looks like that's the intent in terms of the Trump administration to signal we're not, you shouldn't count on us anymore. Period. Full
When
stop.
we
You can buy weapons from us. We'll sell them to you. We'll give you the warranty service. We'll give you the support at whatever price we charge for support. But it's a business. It's not
it,
anything more than that, right?
it and it's in terms of the administration, it's essentially an abandonment of relationships, unless there is something in it for them or us. Okay.
Mm,
And let's park the Iran war and where that becomes, representative of what we're talking about. But there's the president of Finland who I've been
mhm,
following his writings. He has a great book coming that just came out on the new, the emerging world order.
mhm.
Okay, and Finland is one of the happiest countries in the world by all standards. But the Finns also have this issue, which I think is where we are in the United States, is pessimists are never disappointed.
Mhm.
Okay, and it's
Mhm.
kind of been reduced to that, Jack. All right, which is the situation is such that you can't feel good. You can only feel worried.
Right.
And that's the consequence of what the administration has done and accelerated this feeling of powerlessness on the part of our allies and those people who like having allies to do anything about it. As soon as the administration came in, you had Hegseth and Vance off to Europe for the Munich security conference, basically, implying not only are you on your own, we think you're stupid.
Mm.
Not a way to kick off the relationships, with these guys. And the thing that I keep coming back to is when you look at it from a leadership point of view. Machiavelli had it right. He said, the definition of a leader is the quality of the followers.
Mm.
In other words, yeah, I can be really smart and great and all of this other stuff, but I better have people behind me who are impressive. And that I think is where the administration fell totally short. Loyalty became the driver by which they appointed people. You've already seen two, 14 months into it, you've seen two women who were loyalists, really trying to do everything that they thought Trump wanted them to do, and didn't make it. Okay, I think that there's going to be more. I hope Hegseth is one of them because I think he is just totally in over his head. Okay, I don't understand where he came from and why the Senate. Well, Joni Ernst, I think it's in Iowa or Idaho, who was a veteran, uh, just rolled over, and that's how we ended up getting in. But
Hmm.
his handling of the going back to your questions about the Third World War, his handling of the Iran war are just reprehensible. I mean, there's nothing good that I can say about it as a citizen, as a former military officer, and somebody who knows a little bit more than the average Joe about asymmetrical.
I'm interested in probing for a second your thought about what he would have done differently once this sort of approach was taken with Israel. There was obviously an agreement that, hey, Israel is going to, I thought initially Israel is going to lead and we're going to follow. Now it looks more like we're leading and Israel is following, and we're losing planes and pilots, or at least one of them today.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
guess one got out and one got rescued. I don't know if the other one is out and just can't be found or is deceased. But to me, that looks like war conduct, right? Where your planes are being shot down, as opposed to the friendly fire mistakes that were made earlier in this endeavor, right? Where three
Right.
planes were knocked down by allies by mistake, right? Mistakes happen. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious, like at some level, um, what do you imagine could have been done differently? Because once you start a war, I think the famous quote is, "You're in the fog of war." Right? Pretty much it's foggy in a war because it's a dynamic game, and the dynamic game theory of it changes almost minute to minute, right?
Well, yeah, I think that you're asking three questions at the same time. So,
At least,
let me try to take, like I'm trying one at a time here. Israel is always at war.
right,
Okay. I mean,
right.
they're surrounded, and it's only their adversaries just take turns punching at them.
It's a
Okay.
PCC, it's a PCZ, a permanent conflict zone,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly.
really what
Right.
it is.
Yeah, and I know a number of people who are living in Israel, and I've had interactions with people who are in the Israeli Defense Forces. And what happened is, starting on October 7th with the Hamas situation, and the attitude of the Israelis is, we've got to make sure that we are in a position that we are just no longer ever going to be vulnerable.
Right.
Okay. So I can see there, and I have no inside knowledge on this, obviously, but I can
Mm-hmm.
see where Netanyahu would essentially say, we need to exploit the advantages of the bombardment of the nuclear facilities. So we are going in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which would present the administration three options.
Mm-hmm.
One is, via con Dios, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Second is, we don't think you should do this, and we will um, not punish. We will show our disagreement overtly.
Mm-hmm.
Third is, we will join you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which appears to have been the answer.
Right.
Okay, so let's assume that of the three options, the decision to join was just I think it was the wrong one, but it's the one that made. So second is, going into your situation here is the fog of war.
Right.
Once you're in a war, you better figure out a way to finish it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And if you look at the options to finish it, I'm talking strictly for the US.
Right.
Okay. First option is declare victory and go home.
Right, right. You can do that pretty easily. You just get on the show like last night. It was a last night. He could have gotten on there. I think it was last night. Maybe it was the night
Uh,
before.
Night
But
before.
night before, he could have gone on there and just
Right.
said, "Mission accomplished. We're exiting. Israel is in control of its destiny, and the rest of Europe is going to fend for itself in the Strait of
Well,
Hormuz." That's what I thought was going to happen. I think that's what the stock market thought too.
Well, I think that let me articulate the four options, okay?
Right.
Because I think all of them are still alive. I think the
Yeah.
opportunity to declare victory and go home is now becoming non-existent. Second option is, if Israel wants to continue to prosecute this war
Hmm.
with ground forces, we could provide close air support and other types of issues, other types of support, military
Right.
support.
Right.
Third one is option two with U.S. Special Forces, people on the ground on discrete missions. And
Hmm.
the fourth is boots on the ground. I mean, much more of a massive presence. Okay. Now we're building up for something in the Middle East, but so far the numbers of people who've been deployed are insignificant to do a lot of damage to a country of over 90 million people.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not sure which of those four options is being contemplated. However, the other problem that you have here is that, and this, nobody expected them, being the Iranians, to attack their neighbors or close the Strait of Hormuz. That's basic scenario planning for warfare.
Right.
And
That had to be in the book.
it was a
Right. That had to
it
be in
was
the
a
book.
it was a component of it. I've had the opportunity to sit in some of these skiffs and play the what if game, and it's always been on the table, which is the
Right.
reason that previous presidents, including Trump in his first term, didn't think it was a really good idea,
Right.
to go to war.
Right.
And
Well,
what
you had at least one previous president um, go on the air pretty quickly and say, "Look, this was the biggest worry that I had at the time that he
sure.
started the Iraq War." Clinton was like, we knew that was a choke point. I mean, he was on the
Yeah.
air pretty quickly, sort of saying, "This is a reality. This isn't a surprise." Right?
Yeah, and them attacking they're attacking the Iranians attacking our capabilities in their neighbor countries, and not being all that careful about civilian targets and things like that. That was part of the scenario. So the
Mhm.
military had to 100% certain the military created these various scenarios. And what happens in these situations, the intelligence community weighs in with a recommendation, the military weighs in with a recommendation, and then it's
Right.
up to the executive branch, i.e., the president, to either accept or reject the advice.
Right.
Okay. He is the commander in chief as it relates to the military.
Hmm.
So, and as long as it's not an unlawful order, okay, you have to follow the order.
Right.
The but the other part here that is making it, and this is where I'm going back to Hegseth, is he's making this like, it's something like Game of Thrones, for Christ's sake.
Right.
Video games with the White House in the background that are melding in, Avenger videos with bombing where people have lost their lives. I mean, that's pathetic.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
that's beneath contempt.
Hmm.
And just finishing up, and then I'm going to focus on Hegseth, who is the poster child for one of the reasons we should be worried, is the Middle Eastern countries right now are essentially saying, we told you we didn't want you to do this. Now that you did it, you can't walk away and leave us with a really pissed off Iran.
Right.
Okay, so you got to figure out something, and I think that something is one of the reasons we're probably going to be there longer. Okay, than first off never having gone in, and now having to be there longer. But let's stay on the leadership piece of it too,
Hmm.
because this is now one of the things you had, the president's speech, okay, which raised more questions than it answered. Okay, uh, but the thing is, you've got the military who's really been doing everything they're supposed to be doing and doing it quite well.
Hmm.
And now you've got a Secretary of Defense who's behaving like a child with a video game,
Right.
okay, and insulting at the same time.
Right.
Okay, let's forget Signalgate. Let's forget the attack on DEI. I
Hmm.
would prefer not to forget, but unfortunately, I think it's a reality. Is jumping in front of the promotions of worthy officers because they're black or women.
Right.
Okay, which called the question, and three generals were fired yesterday.
Hmm.
Okay, including the most senior person in the army. Not a really good time to take that person off the
Right.
books. Okay.
Right.
But the thing is, what caught our attention was his lack of experience and his attitude. There is when a warrior is killed,
Hmm.
okay, in the recent past, certainly not Vietnam, but subsequent to Vietnam, there's a concept called dignified transfer. Okay, where people go, elected officials go, and then they meet the remains as they are brought into the United States in Dover.
Hmm.
And it's become a tradition. It's silent, Jack, because
Hmm.
families are there, and hysterical sobbing,
Right.
is not uh, is totally inappropriate because it embarrasses them. But
Right.
the thing is that Hegseth went, and when somebody asked him about it, he used the opportunity to be dismissive of the ceremony and go after the media because he took it as a criticism of President Trump. Okay, then you have the president going to one wearing one of his USA hats, which by the way is inappropriate,
Hmm.
saluting the
Hmm.
remains, and then using that picture to raise money.
Right.
So when you're looking at the leadership in the war, not the military, but you're looking at the civilian leadership, you're saying,
Right.
what the fuck?
Right.
And Hegseth's March 31st briefing, okay, where he's talking about a soldier with a heart bigger than Texas, and he's talking to an airwoman, and he's describing the scene like it's a background of a movie, okay, where the sun is setting and the mist on the tarmac, and she's asking for bigger bombs. That's just not the mark of people that you want to put a lot of faith in if this war gets any friggin' worse.
Right. Right.
Okay, because it's uninformed, it's condescending, and frankly, it's totally inappropriate. And
I think it's demoralizing for the troops, right?
I
Ultimately.
think what happens is that when you're in the middle of this stuff, you're not worried about the leadership at home. You're worried about the people you're working with. Okay,
Right.
and it becomes a very much of a tunnel vision. Every person who's been in these positions right now, the first question they have is, if somebody's shooting at me, how will I behave?
Right.
Okay. And the second question they have is, how can I make sure that whatever it is I do is the right thing and I don't get myself or anybody else hurt?
Right.
So right now, that's how people are thinking. Hegseth's, being interviewed by Stephen Miller's wife on a podcast about who would he, among the cabinet, would he choose as a babysitter? That's noise. And no, none of the people who are deployed or about to be deployed really give a shit about this because, frankly, it's irrelevant to their survival.
Hey, let me read you something that I read today in the Time magazine. They have a cover that basically says, and this is the magazine, Time magazine from
Yeah.
just a couple of days ago. It says why Trump went to war, and the opening line on page 22
Mhm.
is President Donald Trump had just arrived at Mar-a-Lago on Friday night, February 27th, when he got word from U.S. intelligence officials that they believed they had located Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Mhm.
And they go on to sort of basically say he was briefed at that point about these high value targets. So
Right.
is there a theory that the start of this was an opportunity, which is all these guys are meeting together in one place, and just one solid bomb will basically take out the head of all the leadership, and that will somehow cause regime change because of course at the same time there's a belief that all the students and others in Iran that are upset about the old regime are somehow going to create a new regime. And that
That
didn't play out, right? That didn't play out the
Yeah.
way I think he might have expected it to play out. It's part of
Well,
the fog of war,
I'm
right?
I'm not sure what he expected, and frankly, there was a run up to this before February 22nd. I think that there's now three questions again, Jack. You really multiple questions here. I'm going to, have to start doing better on my grading.
No, you do good
Yeah,
density. We get a lot of density out of these exchanges.
I would hope that that's not the reason we went to war, is they were all together. Okay, because by the way, that's really dumb that they were all together.
Yeah. It's not on their part, but then you could say strategically, it was a huge opportunity, right?
You could take strategically, but that would be contradicting the advice you've been given, okay, and the consequences of the act.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my answer, it's an implicit answer. The advice you've been given is this is probably not a good idea to go to war with Iran, okay, for the aforementioned reasons. Second is us doing it, that's tactics in search of a strategy absent consultation with other interested parties.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, fine, we take out the leadership. Apparently we did. But the dude was 86 years old. He wasn't going to be around that much longer anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one of the things that foreign policy wise is you try to cultivate relationships with potential successors. Okay. And you wait it out. There's a saying that's pretty common in the military, Jack, and uh, um, you can be the biggest military and the best military in the world, but one of the things that happened to the Russians in Afghanistan is there's a quotation that came and says, you have the watch, but we have the time.
Right.
In other words, yeah, fine, great, you can bomb the shit out of us, but we'll just sit it out till something else happens.
Right.
And now we're in the situation of something else happening.
Well, there's something else is always happening in the U.S. because we have elections every couple of years, and
I think that
right.
I'm actually thinking something else is happening, and there's four things that I think are happening all at the same time. One is our reputation as an ally is blown. Okay.
It's gone.
Second, and from a warfare point of view, giving additional money to Russia so they can continue to prosecute a war in Ukraine. Okay. I don't know.
That's backward. That's backwards.
It's a little awkward.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the third issue here is that, if the United States, which has been an influence and a consideration for Russia, China, other societies, okay, in terms of protecting their allies, is no longer there, how will this group of bad actors behave? So the consequences of, you could take out the Ayatollah, congratulations, but this is I would have hoped that this would prompt a bridge over the River Kwai moment, when right after the guy blows up the bridge, he hits himself in the head, and so, oh my God, what have I done?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right, fine, you got the Ayatollah, boom, upside the head. Now what?
Right.
Okay. And so, they're talking about, we're finally, the president of Iran, we're finally dealing with a
rational actor.
He was a president before.
Right.
We went to war. I don't know why he became all more rational in the last couple of weeks. And the thing is that we're in a war that is still inconclusive as to why we're in it in the first place. Mm-hmm. We have treasure. 13 soldiers have lost their 13.
Maybe 14. Maybe 14 with this pilot that's missing. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue here is I think the number is over 200 wounded, without any explanation as to how serious they are. And we're in a position where our allies, the thing is, this happened before,
mm-hmm.
and it was us who didn't show up.
Right.
people don't understand Title V was created in such a way that European countries, Canada and the US, could protect each other from Russia.
Right.
Okay. But it was always envisioned as a protection within Europe, the societies that are encompassed in the agreement. Okay.
Hmm.
As a way of saying it's probably not a good idea to tug on Superman's cape.
Right.
Okay. And what happened is in the 50s, Europe really needed to resolve the Suez Canal situation because that, with Egypt, et cetera, was going to really hurt all of Europe. So they did what they needed to do, protect their interests. They asked us for help, and we said no. Okay. So, you've got a situation in the same thing. If you put yourself in the president of Germany, why is he going to put his soldiers at risk, okay, for a war that he doesn't agree with, was never consulted about, okay, only to aggravate the Iranians? If I were him, I would be waiting for the shooting to stop and then start some negotiations to get the oil flowing again.
Right.
I think that that's what they're sitting there waiting for.
I mean, the precedent that they don't want to set is that if the U.S. decides to be offensive, they have to be offensive when the notion behind the NATO treaty is very much defensive, right?
It is defensive.
It's defensive. I mean, that's the whole sort of point of the Department of Defense becoming now the Department of War. It's almost a statement like what I think it's a statement of is, look, Rome is burning. We want Rome to somehow still be the place that everyone recognizes as the leadership and the currency and everything else associated with being the predominant power. And the only way we can get there is by essentially asserting military strength and hoping that people will respect us as a result. And it's backfire. I think it's backfiring, and it will continue to backfire.
If you look at military history, whether it's the art of war, or you read the history of the Thucydides trap, or history of the Peloponnesian War, you only fight those wars that you have an envisioned strategy that the tactics can collapse around it.
Right. Wars are won way ahead of the first bullet being fired.
Exactly.
In the planning. Right.
Going back to what was the envisioned strategy, the consequence of taking out the Ayatollah, if that was in fact what he did, the reason he did it. But the other situation, the other aspect of this is, I'm speaking for our consultancy. Okay, we're research based, focusing on leadership.
Right.
Okay, and the top 5 bad behaviors based on our research are hypocrisy, bias, intolerance, aggression, and expediency. And all of those are present in this particular situation. And that's what's got our firm's attention. It's certainly what's got the attention of our clients. I meant to jump in on this comment you made earlier is the consequence of this, and the reason that this I don't think will go as far as the midterms is I don't think the global economies can tolerate this screw up as bad much longer.
It's shocking to me that it's held up this far.
Yeah, I mean, what I could envision right now is what could force the stopping of the firing. I don't know about Israel. I mean, they have reasons to worry. They have since their existence. But I think that the issue here is there's a scenario that I've had in my mind, and we've kind of played with it within the discussion partner community, is what happens if the Europeans negotiate with the Iranians?
Well, that's going to happen to get whatever license fees need to be paid to get through the Strait of Hormuz, right? That's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, but then the Europeans saying, okay, we need the oil, you don't.
Right.
Stop fighting, stop shooting.
Right.
and then put yourself in the position of the administration. How do they respond to that?
Well,
Has it?
I think they declare victory. I think in their game theory, that's a good outcome. In their
I
game
would
theory, that's an okay outcome.
I would hope that that would be the outcome, and I'm confident that it would be.
Hmm.
Too much ego involved.
I mean, it's an interesting precedent from the point of view of the international waterways being taken over, and the way they do it is to get the ship to sort of maneuver into Iranian uh, water space, and say, well, you're in our water now, so you have to pay the fee, even though at gunpoint we pushed you into it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a wild idea, but they apparently want to sort of legalize it in a way that suggests it's all kosher, and it seems crazy to me.
You're in a situation where you have to also say there's no love loss for the Iranian regime.
Hmm.
Okay, they have been a sponsor of terrorism. They have, there's an awful lot of U.S. citizens who've lost their lives to the regime. So there's a part of me that says, good riddance. But
Right.
at the same time, if we were going to do this, we needed to have an end game. It wasn't going to blow up the global economy and then everybody having a heart attack and rationing their gas in the
Right.
United States. Okay, and we still, I mean, the European Commission, I think, is accurate, is the Economic Commission saying it's going to take years to recover from this. And this has only been a month, 5 weeks.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. And the infrastructure, the oil production infrastructure, the ability to get these ships do not move. It's not like a motorboat. They're not moving very fast, even if they can get through the straits.
Right. Right.
So I have 100% truthfully that the attorney general was fired to change the news cycle after Trump's speech.
Oh, to change the news cycle? Really?
To change the news cycle, yeah.
That's
He,
interesting.
oh, yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting flip.
Yeah.
I frankly thought this was brewing for a long time, and
Oh, I'm sure.
there is some reporting that suggests, and people said no, that's crazy, but there was some reporting on MSNBC. I'm trying to remember the name of the reporter. It's that woman, it's this kind of middle-aged woman that kind of
Rachel,
Rachel Maddow.
right, right.
She's really been following this, and
Oh,
she's
yeah.
made a number of predictions about it. She's been spot on,
She,
and
the,
she saw
like
it. She saw it coming, right?
the lack of affection I have for the Iranian leadership is pretty consistent with the lack of affection I have for the attorney general.
Right, right,
However, her firing didn't have to be within 48 hours of his speech,
right,
you know,
right.
because his speech, had, had everybody going, "What?"
Like, where's the beef, right?
Yeah, where,
Where's the,
if you were looking for some reassurance, and the only good news that when I was listening to the speech, okay, was that he didn't say we're leaving NATO.
right,
Probably, Jack, the only reason he didn't say we could lose NATO was one of the things that President Biden did in anticipation of if it wasn't um, Trump, it would be somebody else, is
mhm,
a president cannot decide unilaterally to leave NATO. It has to be a vote of Congress.
right.
I think Ms. Bondi probably lost her job in order to change the news cycle or the timing of her departure. I think her departure was preordained due to the Epstein files, but I think that the timing of it was convenient.
Yeah, but it's probably not had that effect in truth.
It's actually I was flipping through because I was convinced of this. I
Yeah,
was surfing all of the networks, the cable networks, Fox,
right.
MS Now, CNN, a couple of the right wings, and it was the lead story. Her
Oh, okay.
firing was her firing was the lead story.
So you think it's actually had the effect that I understand the intent was there, but do you think it's actually had the effect? Because to me, he actually handled it in a very polite way, like, she's a great American and a great patriot, but we just apparently don't see eye to eye. Thank you very much. I get to do this, and now moving on to the next person.
I've been thinking.
It wasn't as ugly as some of the firings he's done. I guess that's another
Well,
way to put it.
you
Right.
can fire people and humiliate them.
Right.
You fire people and give insincere compliments.
Right.
Okay. And I
Right.
think that the compliments that he gave her, and Christy Nome, and it'll be the same because truthfully, the judgment of President Trump in putting both of these women in the positions they held in the first place,
Well, it's questionable.
that
Yeah.
was questionable.
Right.
And I would say the same thing about Tracy Gabbard. I would say the same thing about Hegseth, Ludnick. Yeah, I mean he had some chips to play here, but you've got going right back to this whole leadership research that we do is if you're not putting competent people in, I mean,
Right.
I'm looking at DOD. Look at the gravitas of a Pete Hegseth compared to a Robert McNamara, Robert Gates, a Lloyd Austin.
Right.
Okay, come on, that's the only reason. Or looking at Matt Gaetz possibly having been the Attorney General.
Hmm.
So I'm more worried about who the leaders are in critical positions overall, okay, and as it relates to what we've been paying a little bit more attention using the case study of the Iran war in terms of our op-eds and blogs.
Right. Now, I just want to end with this idea because I have in my head this thought. It could be that we inadvertently ended up in this war. By that, I mean, he sees the opportunity to knock out these top people with a single shot. And he believes somehow that this is going to be like a 2 week, the way Putin thought, this is a 2 week mission. We're in and out and we're done. And he says to himself, well, I got this Epstein controversy. I got a bunch of other stuff happening. I got to show some strength here. And he doesn't realize that the Iranians have a playbook. They know how they're going to play their playbook. And it's not just that these folks that get killed are somehow going to result in the Iranian regime collapsing. Because the truth is, it's the Revolutionary Guard that's actually running the country, not these figureheads, right? That's the real truth here. And you're not going to knock out the entire Revolutionary Guard with one shot. So it's a bit of wishful thinking and a bit of bravado. And a bit of what I worry about is the same thing can happen somewhat inadvertently in a nuclear crisis where the decision is made to use something tactical and it just goes with a domino effect, and we're all goners at that point, right? We're
Well,
fundamentally all goners.
you would hope that the President of the United States had better impulse control.
I don't see it.
Well,
Yeah, I don't see it.
if the Time magazine article suggests that the reason we're at war is because of the consolidation of the leadership, that's bad impulse because two things, Jack. One is it totally contradicts the advice he was getting or the information he was getting on the implications of going to war.
Hmm.
So if that was the catalyst, what he did, he was ignoring the information he was getting and the recommendations he was making. Okay,
Right.
you saw that when Tracy Gabbard and the head of the CIA, okay, both were being grilled in a congressional committee, and they refused to answer the question, what was the advice that you gave the president? And they kept
Hmm.
reverting back, the president is the only one that can interpret. But the other thing is, and there's a story that was written in one of Bob Woodward's books,
Hmm.
and this is the type of presence that I would like to. And I'm sorry, I'm maybe too focused on the military, but
Hmm.
focusing on the leadership aspect of it. But the concept called the predicate, where in order to diffuse situations, you articulate what your capabilities are in a very
Hmm.
calm, reasoned way to a belligerent.
Right.
And Secretary Austin, okay, and ask and answer the question after this. When the Russians were whining about using tactical nukes, okay, because the war wasn't going well for them initially in the Ukraine,
Right.
okay, Biden couldn't talk to Putin. The Secretary of State couldn't talk to his counterpart,
Mm-hmm.
but Austin could talk to his.
Mm-hmm.
And he, in a very calm way, said, "You have to stop doing this. You know you're not going to do it. You're going to get us involved."
Mm-hmm.
And the Russian said, "I don't like being threatened." And
Mm-hmm.
Austin, according to the witnesses and the readout from the conversation, says, "Sir, I'm not threatening you. I'm just reminding you I'm the leader of the largest military in the history of the world."
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine Pete Hegseth having a conversation like that?
No, no,
Can
that's the
you?
problem.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Right.
You just hit the reason that I don't sleep.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And it's hard to imagine that our kids and grandkids are going to say, oh, the 2020 period was such a great period. We had all this artificial intelligence and so many other great things happening. I think they're going to look at things like you guys basically bankrupted us by spending trillions of dollars on blowing up a bunch of places that ultimately didn't need to be blown up. Like you spent a fortune, and that's basically destroyed whatever aspect of a social security system might still exist after 2032, among other things, and a bunch of our own failing infrastructure throughout the United States, right? We don't have the greatest infrastructure, but we're spending trillions blowing up other people's infrastructures. So it's an amazing period, and I'm not very proud of it, and I don't know that I could ever explain it to my kids or grandkids. That's for
I
sure.
Unfortunately, my grandkids are college age. Okay, so I'm
Don't
being
need.
grilled. I'm being grilled, and I have to remind them that Happy Days was fiction.
Right.
You
That's
know,
right. That's right.
you had the Korean War going into the Vietnam War. You had protests all over the place. You had racial strife,
Right.
etc. So, you know, when people talk about the good old days, I don't know when they were because there's
Right.
always been something, usually self-inflicted, that we've managed to fuck the world up,
Almost always
and
self-inflicted.
including now.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, on that note, have a great Good Friday afternoon. Have a happy Easter, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. April 29th is the deadline date for some decision on whether this war is going to be declared or not. So we should definitely tune in again on April 30th to see what plays out,
Well,
right?
right now I'm taking advantage of being a, an Irish Catholic, spiritual without going to church all the time. But
Right.
I'm really liking the moods of our Pope.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
hear you.
you know,
Right.
God's keeping score on that one.
Absolutely. Well, take care. Have a happy Easter. We'll see you in a few weeks. Bye
Look
bye.
forward to it, Jeff.
Bye bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.